We want to keep powering on, and our next Power Talk is with Ricardo Fernandez, the Managing Director of Limehome. And I think what he's going to be talking about is super interesting. Hi, Ricardo.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, Ricardo, I'm going to give you the floor in just 1 second. I know that you're going to be talking about the importance of the team and team culture in entrepreneuria and how it's important. And this talk is powered by BOT. We want to actually salute our partners of this event. So how do you manage efficient remote teams through this pandemic? Ricardo, go ahead.
Thanks. As mentioned, my name is Ricardo Fernandez, and I wanted to chat about the leading and managing teams, but with a special focus on remote working. So I'm going to share my screen right now so I can have a couple of slides that I can share with you guys. 1 second. There we go. Perfect. So I've been working for about 20 years. The last 10 years I've been working remotely. So this whole pandemic and COVID situation actually is quite normal for me. And I wanted to share some anecdotes, some stories, and hopefully give you guys some ideas of how to best proceed as you start your new startups, growth companies, adventures. Okay. So I'm a Spanish American who's lived in about 7 different countries throughout my life. The last 15 years, I've actually been living in Spain. And most interesting, the last 10, I've been working remotely for several digital startups in the US, in the UK, all over Europe. And from 2014 to 2019, I was the only employee in a company of 200 where I worked remotely. And what I think most interesting is that I was head of global and business development for a fintech company called Prodigy Finance. And I managed 40 people remotely, 40 people in 7 different countries, 4 different time zones. And people were asking me, why did I start working remotely? And I had a very clear idea 10 years ago. And hopefully I'll be able to share some of these stories with you guys. But for me, I wanted to do something fun and innovate while I was working. So, remote working seemed something really interesting for me. I wanted to be able to choose a job no matter where I lived. So I was actually here in this study in Madrid in Spain, and I could choose a job based in London or in the US. And most important of all, I wanted to actually be able to spend time with, or more time, I would say, with my family and friends. I didn't want to do the whole commute back and forth, an hour, 2 hours a day. But it was a tough choice. I challenge you, all of you guys, who are thinking about working remotely, why is it that you want to do the remote work? Because it does have its challenges. And what's interesting is that, I wanted to leave this quote up here is, I was an anomaly for the last 10 years working remotely. And now with this new normal, I'm actually the norm. Everyone's working remotely. But I think it's most important to think about what is remote working going to look like in the future. For me, it's very clear that it's going to be some sort of hybrid model. And by this I mean is we will be working from the office, maybe 1 to 3 days a week, and we'll also be working in our home office or whatever we define. I'm going to actually share my latest professional story, which is a GM of Limehome. So Limehome is a German startup, I would say growth company now, because we're about 100 employees, which operates touristic and service departments all over Germany. So I was hired in April of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, when I couldn't even leave my house in Spain, only to go shopping to the supermarket and a couple of other emergent situations to scale the company. So, I put on my remote working hat on, which I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I started hiring a team, business development, operations. But in about 3 months, we realized we needed an office, which came as a surprise to me. The main reason was because we needed to transmit the culture and the team vibes that we had created from Germany, into the Spanish team. Like, the culture is actually something really important for startups, especially as you're scaling. And that's very hard to do in a remote setting. And the second reason is that we actually hired quite a few junior people in the team who were fresh out of school. They didn't really know what processes of working were, meetings, emails, etc. So we had to teach them how to work. Once again, it's very tough to do this in a remote setting. So this hybrid combination of office and work actually is what I think the future would look like. But before you can even think about setting up a remote team and working remotely, you need to think about the basics. So I wanted to share here what I think are the basics of working remotely. In my opinion, for example, something as simple as having a good internet connection and being able to work is vital. In 2014, when I started at Prodigy Finance, we were all using Skype and we would have all these meetings, and it was a horrendous experience. Bad video, bad audio, really, really tough. And it took us about a year to discover Zoom, which obviously everyone knows about right now. And we started using it, back in 2015, and it completely changed the effectiveness of our organization and how we work together. Or for me, one of the most important things about getting the fundamentals right of remote working is a cultural understanding of each other. For many of us that work with people from all over the world, we need to understand that people have different ways of working together. And in a remote setting, when you don't have that physical presence, that becomes even more important. Something as simple as being on time to a meeting is fundamental and actually very rude if you're not in certain cultures. But in many cultures, for example, the Latin culture, being 5-6 minutes late is actually not that big of a deal. So in a remote setting, these things need to blend together. You need to make sure you set things right. So it's absolutely fundamental to think about these cultural differences for people. For any of you guys that are working remotely and are actually working with different cultures, I highly recommend the book, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I shared it with my organization back in 2015, and it really created a high performance team where we trusted each other more and we were able to talk in a lot more efficient way. So I highly recommended the book. So now that you have you're scaling, you're thinking about remote working, what are the processes and functions that you can think about doing remote? So my learning, from the last 10 years, that everything can be done remotely and outsourced. Absolutely everything. Just some things are much easier. For example, customer support, tech, and operations. While some things are much tougher, such as the sales department or core functions and strategy. The key thing you need to take into account is that you need to think about the processes, documentation, and everything that you're going to set up in order to set up a good remote process. So I'll share another story. Back in 2017, in my last company, we had about 100-person outsourced call center. So we launched our second product, and we were like, great, let's follow the same process. We'll start outsourcing right away. And actually, it was a big failure on our side. We lost about 6 to 12 months of the go-to-market because we didn't set up the process correctly. We didn't document things correctly. So if I were to redo that again, I would actually do things in-house, set things correctly, set the processes, document well, and then find the right partner to be able to outsource. But this decision of what you actually do remote and what you outsource is fundamental to get things right. And that can actually save you and speed up your scaling process really, really well. So last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to manage teams and really get the most out of managing teams, especially with in a remote setting. So I've been quite lucky, I think, in my career. I've been able to work with more than 30 different managers, mostly because of my consulting projects and all the startups that I worked with. So I learned all the great things from certain managers and all the things or mistakes that I should try to avoid. And in all of these people that I worked with, all these managers that I worked with, the key ingredient that really helped success was measuring the performance of the team. And in order to measure effectively the performance of the teams, you need to set good structure. And for me, OKRs are some of the best tools to use to measure the performance. If you're not familiar with OKRs, just Google it. And for those of you that are, I'll share the reasons that I think OKRs are effective. So for me, it's they lead to great alignment in the organization. Everyone is seeing what everyone is doing, great transparency in terms of setting a specific goal. And then you set goals that can be measured. In my last few companies, as a startup, you're always thinking about 20, 30 things you want to do, and then you fail. You set up 5 or 6 things. With OKRs, you measure, you set the 5 or 6 things you want to measure, and that's how you focus and you create a high performance team. especially when you're doing things remotely, it's even more fundamental. Well, thank you very much. I hope some of my anecdotes and stories were useful for you guys, and keep the conversation going on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help out and share my stories. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you so much.